Hello, I'm Tiffany, and this is Kristen Helm Farms. I'm growing flowers in the southeastern Arizona desert, slowly, imperfectly, and honestly. Join me on this journey. Welcome back, flower friends. This week I want to make a video talking about the mistakes I made on my flower farm and what I plan on doing a little differently. While we're doing that, let's watch me also attempt to make some dried flower wreaths for this upcoming market season. So let's get started. My first mistake was that I didn't soil test. And yes, I know we hear this all the time on all these flower channels that you have to test your soil before you plant. But in reality, I thought that just by buying in soil, I was in good hands. Unfortunately, even with that and amending with compost, I can really tell that I probably was not doing my flowers any type of justice. They had pretty stunted stem length. They didn't grow, some of them just didn't really grow great in their soil. So I honestly wish that I would have just taken the time to get my soil tested to know the amendments that I needed to put in there. My second mistake was that I didn't put tarps down when we were initially setting our beds out in our yard. And unfortunately, this did cause a lot of headache later on in my season. So when I started out gardening, the entire yard was pretty much just completely barren and was almost just like dust and dirt and rocks. I had no idea that I would expect to see weeds actually coming forth from that ground, but sure enough, in the summer season, I did have plenty of weeds to contend with. Lots of mallow, lots of mesquites randomly popping up, and lots of goat heads, which were just such an awful pain, mentally and physically. So I really wish I would have put down some large black silage tarps in order to kind of block out those weed seedlings, instead of just taking the quick route of setting down cardboard and dirt. My next mistake was that I invested in supplies that I didn't use or it didn't even work. And so as new flower farmers, we are often caught up in wanting to be like the established successful flower farms that are out there. And so we want to mimic the supplies that they are purchasing in hopes that maybe that will be the guarantee of our success. But unfortunately, I'm here to tell you there's things that were recommended by very well established farms and channels out there that absolutely did not work for me. And one of the big things that I can think of offhand is that I purchased this plastic row cover that a lot of flower farms use to block weeds out when they plant their transplants in the ground. And they also use this as well for walking paths to block any type of weed seeds from coming through and everything else. And so unfortunately, I ordered this, got it in, tried to lay it out, and to my surprise, our ground out here in the desert is so hard and compacted, I could not even get my landscaping pins down into it to grip it into the ground. And so it would do me no good because the winds would come through and just rip the entire sheet up off of the ground. I even tried to mulch over it. I placed heavy rocks on top of it, and still Mother Nature had a way of gripping it and throwing it off into my fence line every time. And so that was an expensive mistake. The other thing I can think of is I purchased heating mats after just being told like a bazillion times that you have to have heating mats for certain seedlings. And I have never used those things. They are still rolled up, sitting at the very top of my shelf unit in my seed starting room. And that is one thing, unfortunately, that I just, kind of almost regret buying. This next mistake is one that is much to the chagrin of my husband. I didn't make my rows the same width when I established my beds outside. And I wish I would have, because I did find later in the season, as we were starting to place hoop structures in, that it was very hard to navigate with a wheelbarrow down the middle of these rows and paths, in order to get to our compost bin and other areas for cleanup. And so the market standard is 30 inches wide. I don't even know what I was using width-wise. I was eyeballing most of it, just trying to cram as much as I possibly could. And unfortunately, some of those rows just were like completely like off kilter. They would narrow in certain spots, be wide in certain spots, and unfortunately, it made it very difficult for us to get in there and weed, to walk through the rows, to, like I said, to navigate a wheelbarrow through. So much to, like I said, Paul's frustration, lesson learned. I think this upcoming season, we're definitely going to focus on making those rows the standardized 30 inches wide. And finally, my last point, I wouldn't call it my very last mistake. I'm sure there's plenty more of those ahead. But for this video, the last one I want to share with you is that I didn't harvest correctly. And what I mean is that I'm a complete newbie when it comes to harvesting and cutting flowers. So a lot of these, I didn't know the correct way to harvest, and I didn't know the proper length to cut down on the plants. I was so nervous that I was going to kill them if I cut too far down. And so one of the first flowers that kind of felt the brunt of this, which is probably the worst type to do this to starting out, is my snapdragons. And so what happened is my snapdragons were some of the first things to come and bloom in my garden. And so when I went out to start cutting those stems, I cut them a little bit on the shorter side rather than cutting deeper down onto the stem. And so what happens with snapdragons is, since they are cut and come again, is that those additional stems, once that main stem was cut, once those additional stems start to come out, they unfortunately were super duper short and stem length, and I couldn't use them hardly for anything. And so I was having these bumper crop type of stems, which were only about, maybe 6 inches to 8 inches long, and I couldn't use those hardly for anything. Where if I would have just cut down deeper into the plant, I would have gotten nice longer stems that I could have used and made them a little bit more viable for other things. Even for dried flower purposes, they would have been a little bit more useful. So that was unfortunately a very hard lesson to learn, a big mistake. And so that wasn't the only flower even. I learned that hard with my marigolds as well, because in my mind starting out, I thought that each stem equals one flower, and that's just not the case. You can have multiple blooms on a stem and cut it, as long as you can cut it long and deep, and it's still a good viable stem to use in bouquets. And so definitely a silly mistake, but now I know how to cut things in the future just from trial and error, and again, just research and reading up as much as I can. Well, my flower friends, that is all that I have for you today. I appreciate you for tuning in and coming back to watch. If you haven't subscribed, please take the time to do so and help me grow this channel. And thank you so much for watching. Take care. I'll see you next time.